was when that came out, because then that would give away the story. Anyway, so I feel very comfortable talking with these guys in the room, and I very much feel like our work is touching on the same kind of things. I've had the opportunity to lecture at the Seniors Program at Summer Fraser for the last 6 years or so, and that's given me a chance with a very learned audience to test some of these themes out. And then last December, a friend of mine who's a prof at SFU went to the Senate with a whole bunch of his friends from the Education Department, and they were granted the Institute of Environmental Learning, which is a new group that we're working with, and we have a charrette on the go right now. It started last weekend and it ends next weekend, so my thoughts are going to be scrambled. But this is a presentation that I put together for them, and just sort of kick off the Institute, and if my clicker works, if not, I'll do, yeah, all right. And it just sort of looks in a more specific way to what we've been hearing about already tonight. The idea that in the last 10 or 20 years in Vancouver, we've gone a little condo crazy. And that maybe towers work downtown, but when we get to the neighborhoods, it's time to strike for a different building form. And that, yeah, probably make noise, go right for it. And that since the 1950s and 60s, we've known that towers destroy neighborhood fabric. That towers are the wrong way to do social housing, and yet for reasons that are, I suppose, historical and have to do with the way things work in our city, that's what we're being presented. And so this is the Pruitt-Igoe social housing scheme in St. Louis that went up in 1956, and then even more famously still went down 15 years later. So the sustainability of that project was about 15 years.
Wow.
Okay? And
Why did they?
How did it go down?
Yeah.
dynamite. Somebody had a lot of money and they had a camera. In those days we didn't have video. I'm going to see if I can make this clicker work, but if I can't, I'm just going to have to stand closer to the computer. Yeah, it's not doing it for me, so I'm going to have to change my tact here. Anyway, so one of the things that is puzzling to me is this business that our governments, as in the case here, we're looking at the Knight Street Bridge, standing on 62nd Avenue or so, and that our governments can make these great investments in infrastructure, which are good for the economy, but at the same time seem to be bad for some private property, and seem to be bad for the neighborhood as a whole. So that when we look at this particular case, this may be within a story or two or three, the kind of building type that we're interested for creating higher density without building towers, because it has doors that connect to the street and has windows that look out on the sidewalk. But because these folks have over 66,000 cars a day going by their front door, then we know from research that that is going to mean that the neighborhood is basically not able to function socially. It's going to be disruptive of that. And if we just pan a little bit to the right and see how the single-family residential buildings are doing, they're really not faring much better. In this particular part of Knight Street, they are the lots don't end grain on the arterial; they turn the side to it, so there's a little bit of a sense of protection. But it's clear that the housing has gone down market and rental, because there's been a loss of value in the neighborhood as a direct result of the transportation, construction, and the traffic volume. And if we count 1, 2, 3, 4, we kind of have to go to where this car is parked over here before we begin to see investment returning to the neighborhood. And pollution and noise and those kinds of impacts we can measure readily because there are point sources. And so we know that if you want to have half as much pollution at your doorstep from a house fronting the street, you have to be 4 times as far away. It's the inverse square law. Or if you want the noise level at your window to be 1/4 of what it would be in front of 66,000 cars a day, then you have to be 16 times as far away. And in this particular neighborhood that has 15 house lots per block, it means you have to move to the next block. And so those kinds of impacts are things that we can measure. And so the question comes back, why isn't that our governments are measuring these things, and why isn't that our professional staffs are aware of these things, and sort of tying in their proposals and their development plans to these quantifiable kinds of realities. On the satellite picture, a little bit like Patrick Commons, but a little bit smaller, or grabbing a smaller footprint of urban land to show just the sheer sort of complexity and the scale of urbanism, and to pose the question, how is it that we can wrap our arms around it and come to understand it? And the traditional way has been to take the amount of distance that you can cover in a 5-minute walk, a quarter mile or 400 meters, and then use that as a radius to inscribe a circle and identify a footprint of urban land that measures about 120 acres or half a kilometer square. And that's something that some theorists have termed the quartier. We can, as opposed to a neighborhood might be made up of several quartiers. And we can, by drawing it at the same scale as the satellite photo, get a very quick idea of how much density we can fit in a quartier based on what kind of building types we're using. So that over on the Hastings town site, with sort of single-family residential, we can fit about 3,500 people in our quartier. And over in the North Shore of Falls Creek, using Podium and Tower, we might expect a population of about 26,500. And the question that, of course, we're trying to pose is, where is the middle ground? Are we just left with an option of building suburban sprawl and building towers, or is there something else that we can look at? And that is where the title for this talk comes from, the idea of a density fallacy. That as I go around municipalities in our region, I come up against municipal council after municipal council that, for the reasons that Ned described, are opting for land lift economics and approving towers in places where these things clearly don't belong. I have a problem with tower zones in downtown, but I think even if you look at Metrotown and Burnaby, the towers are just an outright failure. So, do we have to build high-rise in order to get high density? In order to put a lie to that statement, I got in touch with people that I know across the country, and I started asking, so where do I go to see some good stuff? And I came up with what I termed the Canadian quartier, which I presented at a couple of the planning conferences across the